is a professional in dentistry, and he has his own business. He's had his own business for, I think what's it been, over 20 years?
Yeah, 30 plus
30 plus.
practicing. Yeah.
So we wanted to get the chance to interview him, and we're very happy to interview him.
Surprisingly, I consider myself very lucky because dentistry to me was my childhood passion. And I remember even being a 9-year-old kid sitting in a dental chair. The dentist that was working on me was very impressionable. And I really think that's how it all started. They impressed me so much that I just wanted to go into the field. And I just carried that through my whole life. And I'm glad that I did. And I enjoyed doing what I was doing. And I think I would do it again if I had the opportunity. But that's the main reason. And once I got into it, I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed mostly probably the interaction with patients, a lot of feedback from patients, not only the dentistry itself. And the science itself is intriguing in the sense that dentistry is a combination, I think, of art and science. So you can be very creative within the parameters or confines of the science and the education that you receive in school. So, it's a great profession.
You've gone into business renting out an office or owning your own place. Right now, so I have two questions. So first of all, in your case in particular, was it good to have your own property and your own equipment?
Yes, definitely. I started out renting, and I worked before I settled myself and became independent. I worked for, many different offices, all in New York, in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, and even in Manhattan. And ultimately, I ended up on Long Island, and that's where I started my own practice. But I started renting when I became independent on Long Island, and I would say I rented for about 10 to 15 years. And then I saw that the rents became so extreme, and my wife was very advantageous in finding a small house, a piece of property in the same town where I was practicing. And it took, with permits and everything, this was in the town of North Hempstead on Long Island, probably 2 to 3 years to renovate the office and put it into operation. And I did that probably for another 15 years.
Just for perspective, what do you think the rents for a dental office would be today?
Very
For
high.
just for young dentists maybe wanting to pursue that, what would
Well,
you
the
estimate?
rents depend upon the location and the size of the office. When I stopped paying rent, I think it was about 3,000 a month. I have a good colleague of mine who's a specialist. He's a periodontist. He specializes in gums and implants, and he's got a multi-chair office. And I'm in touch with him quite often. His rent now is he practices in Astoria in Queens, a suburb of New York City. His rent now is about $7,000 a month. So rents can really be astronomical. And that's not even Manhattan where rents are high.
Wow.
So, and I say to him, how can you do that? $7,000 a month rent? He said, it's very difficult. That, in combination with what we were speaking about previously, the overhead expense of running an office. So now he pays rent, he doesn't own the property. So it's
Wow, you don't own
advantageous
the
to own real
property
estate.
and 7,000
And
in the negative.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. How do you do that?
How do you live?
And then how do you
Yeah.
How do you
live?
feed
How do
yourself?
you live? You go home with nothing.
But he doesn't sleep in the office, like he sleeps
No,
in
no.
his.
Yeah, he's got a separate house. It's
Wow.
hard. The numbers are astounding, aren't they? Yeah.
Oh, speaking of that though, Abe did bring up a good point. I know it's not on the list, but home offices.
Hmm.
A lot of people in your time, when you started out, had home
Hmm.
offices because it was a good deduction
Hmm.
in regards to the
Hmm.
taxes. You want to explain more why you chose not to do that and said you
Well, the
just
home office is advantageous because there are certain tax incentives in terms of deductions and things like that. There is a requirement, though, in the town that I was practicing, in order to operate a home office, dental office, you're also supposed to be a resident in the home. You're supposed to live in the home as well. Um, I don't know if those tax benefits are still available right now. Plus the fact, remember, you're also, like we said before, a solo practitioner, and you have a dental office on a smaller scale, and you're competing with multi-chair offices. So, but at the end of the day, you still do own the real estate. You still have the real estate.
So for young people starting off today, what do you recommend they do? Just rent or try to find their own place?
I would say to learn the profession and really become adept at it, to rent space, hone your skills that you've
When you're
learned through
starting out.
school.
Hmm.
When you're starting out, I think that's the best way. If you can, and it's what I did. One of my first positions was for a dentist, an older gentleman that I worked for, and he took the time to train me. I mean, you receive a certain amount of training in dental school. Is it enough? Sure, it's more than adequate to practice, but it's even more advantageous to be able to work for someone, um, kind of like an apprenticeship. And when you first get out of school, you learn the business. In school, you don't learn much about business. You don't learn much about insurance, which is a big aspect of running an office. So you learn how to run an office when you work for another dentist in his own private office. So to start out, I would recommend definitely renting space. I would say it's very important. I didn't do a lot of advertising when I was starting out because I thought that the best referral, the best patient referral is from a previous patient.
Right.
And I was able to function on that basis. Today, because of the competition and number of dentists that the schools produce per annum, I think it's important to advertise. I really do. It's important to specialize also. And if you don't have the specialists in your office, bring them in, like I did. So all the procedures are done under one roof. It's more convenient for the patient. It's easier for the dentist, and it improves patient-doctor relationship, I would say, when people don't have to travel to another office. Patients really want to stay in the same office. They want to, become accustomed to meeting the same auxiliaries every time they have an appointment, dental assistant, the receptionist. It makes them feel more comfortable. Yeah.
So definitely nowadays, it's good for people to, like, not just have a page on Facebook and their location on Google Maps, but actually show content, like show the procedures, maybe.
Exactly, exactly. Social media, also something else that we did, which I would still recommend. Uh, if you're in a local community, it's good to go out to the public schools, the elementary schools, do presentations in the schools, and that's a good way to, educate people, especially in an elementary school or even a high school, about dentistry. That's a fine source of patients, and we did that for a while as well. With it,
If you were to start a new dentist office today, where would you start? What state? What city?
I think I would recommend Florida, from what I've seen. The state of Florida. New York is very crowded. New York produces a lot of dental students. For example, New York University, which is probably one of the largest dental universities in the United States, last I saw, produces about 300 dentists a year. Now that's a lot of dentists in a confined area, um, and a lot of dentists like practicing in the urban aspect of the city, New York City or the boroughs. They don't like to go to rural areas, and the areas are the areas that really require dentists.
And then, like a young person today in New York versus a young person in Florida, what do you think are the key differences in like what's waiting for them job wise?
I think the market is more open in Florida, maybe a little bit less competitive, although there are a lot of dentists here. But I think there are more opportunities here than in New York.
So if people were to try to build a career in New York, um, maybe more taxes, less job offers,
Correct. Correct. More taxes in New York, less job offers in New
probably
York.
forced to rent, probably doesn't rent because they want to, but can't afford the mortgage
Forced to
payments.
rent. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Whereas in Florida, eventually, it might take 30 years, but they'll pay off the loan and
Mhm.
be the owners of a
Right.
property.
Right.
Wow, it's
Right.
totally different
Right.
then. Totally
Now,
different.
the licensure is different. If you're licensed in New York, there's no reciprocity. You can't practice in Florida. You have to go through the licensing procedure again and the exams. It's not like some physicians or attorneys. You take the bar in New York, you can practice in another state. With dentistry, Florida is a whole different ballgame. You have to go through the whole licensing procedure again.
Do you know if that's with every state or is that just with Florida? Or
Um,
does New York share a couple reciprocity laws?
It has reciprocity, I think, with about a dozen or 15 different other states.
Okay.
Florida's not one of them.
Okay.
What are the pros and the cons of owning your own equipment and owning your own facility versus renting everything out? I don't know if you can rent machinery out nowadays?
You can rent dental equipment. Yeah, yeah. If you can afford to purchase it, I would say the best thing to do would be to purchase it. I mean, you can also purchase secondhand equipment, which is in very good condition. Boy, it would probably be about 50% less the cost of having to buy it outright. You can rent it as well, but renting the equipment, then in addition to paying rent for the office space, so the overhead gets to be very high that way. But if you have the ability to be able to purchase it, you have it for the rest of your career, and it's functional as well. Like anything else, it's a piece of equipment. If you maintain it, it will service you very well.
So let's say for a young person whose father is a dentist, um, if he's willing to give the son the office, would you recommend the son become a dentist nowadays, or is it a tough like profession overall in the United States?
It's a tough profession. It's a tough profession, but I would recommend going ahead and do it because all of the groundwork is the office is set up.
Everything is
Eh,
done.
Everything is done,
It basically
economically, and
life's a lifetime of work, basically, essentially.
yes, yeah, yeah. A lot of dentists, a lot of dentists don't retire. They just keep at it, and even if they don't have offspring to pass the office on to. But if someone has the opportunity and they have that desire to do the dentistry, I would definitely recommend it.
So
Absolutely.
definitely
Yeah,
worth it if you're a second generation coming into the business
I
itself.
think so. Sure,
But for first
sure.
generation, it's getting very complicated because you
To
come.
start out is complicated. Yep. Yes.
What about people that can't afford to become self-employed? Are there jobs that will pay you?
hmm You'd have to work for a multi-chair, high-volume office, and
How does
you're
that
either
work?
salaried.
Hmm.
Well, you can be salaried, or you can be salaried plus a commission. It's about production. So whatever you produce, you earn a certain percentage of that fee. So there's usually a base salary, and then you have a commission as well, like a salesperson.
And
So
Wow,
and
that's
also,
not an easy job.
no, so but you have to keep producing. Now, it's even better if you can find employment where the employment covers your malpractice costs, your insurance,
Hmm.
because that's a big expense as well. But when you're self-employed, that insurance expense, comes out of your own pocket. So if
I,
you can find an opportunity, it's high volume. Boy, you have to work very hard. But if those overhead expenses can be paid, you're much better off. At the end of the day, you go home with a paycheck.
I was also, Abe and I were discussing it before that I was telling him sometimes it's better to specialize because you work just generally off commissions. Like if you're an orthodontist or
hmm
a periodontist
hmm
or a maxillofacial prosthodontist, right?
Right,
Yeah,
right.
You
I'm a
could just,
layman, so I don't know what the difference. So,
No, but you're asking great questions, though. I mean, they're very pertinent.
did you want to explain that? Like why it would have been better to specialize? Because you don't have to have the overhead expense. You could just go to office.
Specialty is nice, and what I see now is a lot of specialists really don't have a home base, but what they do is they travel from one office to another. Whether it's a specialist that does implants, a specialist that does periodontal surgery, a specialist that does root canal therapy. They don't have the overhead of an office, and they fill their week going to 2 or 3 different offices. So but remember, as a specialist, you have at least 2 more years of postgraduate education after the 4-year general dental degree.
and
So
it's
that's time and
expensive.
expense as well. Yeah, and those tuitions are high as well. For example, a periodontist is either 2 or 3 years a gum specialist. An oral surgeon is probably 6 years of postgraduate training, following 4 years of general dental of a DDS or a D or D. Yeah,
What do they do, periodontists?
periodontists are gum specialists. They do gum surgery, but they can also place implants.
Okay, so it's more
Oral
surgical.
surgeons,
Hmm.
mostly surgical. Oral surgeons have almost the same training as a physician because they do all types of head and neck surgery, implant surgery, um, all types of procedures. But the training is time consuming. The training takes a long time.
What's the average age of graduation, dude? After
I would say the
surgery?
average age, if you became an oral surgeon, by the time you finished, I would say about 35,
Wow.
35 years old.
Very impressive for someone that's
Yeah.
just done school
Yeah,
to. That's so much dedication and time. Like
yeah.
it's especially for
I
a
mean,
young person. Yeah.
yeah. So they have the 4 years of college, the bachelor's degree, 4 years of general dental school, then either 2, 3, or 6 years of dental specialization. So it's a long haul if you want to become an oral surgeon or a periodontist or an orthodontist. But I see that frequently now. A lot of the specialists travel from one office to another, and they do quite well. They do
Right.
quite well.
No overhead, though.
You don't have the overhead expenses.
Rent or anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you have dentists, also a general dentist who may not be as much hands-on as a dentist that has their own office. They manage high volume offices, 2 or 3 high volume offices. That's another way to practice dentistry.
Right.
High volume, accepting all the insurances, Medicaid. When you're high volume, you have to accept all the insurances. The doors have to be open to everybody.
And just for people, listeners that are curious, high volume is like 10 chairs or so. It's a lot of chairs, 10, 20 chairs. So people not aware.
And there's all kinds of coverages. You're participating with all the insurance companies, and boy, there are hundreds of them. You're participating with all the union coverages, and there are hundreds of them. So you accept all that, and of course the Medicaid.
Let's say,
So-
so because we cover finance, let's say we had a successful career and now we have savings. If we were to invest, like actually view it as an investment, would it ever become passive in any way, or does it always require you to be physically at the location? If you were to say, buy the building, put in the equipment, and then do you hire the dentists or?
Yes,
Yeah, and
exactly.
then they work on, like you said, base plus commission.
Salary, correct.
And it's a young
Correct.
people mostly, I think, because
Yeah, I mean, graduates from school are always looking for job opportunity. In offices like that, there's usually a big turnover of dentists. You hire them from school, or maybe with 2 or 3 years training, which is advantageous, so they have the experience. And basically, you employ them, and you do the dental procedures that you want to do. Sure.
So I have a question. So do you think that people that are doing this in financial terms, is it people in finance, or is it just people that know dentistry to the T? Because there's the money people, but I don't know if the money people are going to know enough to actually go into these kind of private equity ventures. Because I think that's what
I guess maybe it's a combination of people, the dentists that know dentistry, and people that know how to invest money. Maybe it's a combination. Maybe it's done in teams. Because a dentist itself knows themselves, they know dentistry, but to the financial aspects, most of them don't know that.
Let's say a young dentist that didn't have capital could approach a person that does have money and say, this is the model, this is a business model, you can project it out. And if it's good, then he would manage the property for the guy, kind of thing.
Exactly.
I imagine it does happen that way.
What's happening right now, too, when I was retiring, I saw a lot of dentists that were a little bit ahead of me in years, and what they did, they were solo practitioners. Some were orthodontists, some were periodontists, they were specialists. And what they ended up doing is selling their practices to huge conglomerates and that's one way to retire.
The American dream.
The American dream.
Yeah, if they pay you the right amount.
Exactly.
Well, that's really great. So then overall, I'm just trying to get it. It's a very hard profession, lots of school, lots of time. It's almost like a lawyer, where if you go into one state, you have to recertify for another state if it's far away.
Yes.
Yes. And it's even at a business level, so at a financial level, it becomes a mix between capital and knowledge. So I don't think if you just have capital, you're in this, because it's so hard to make margin, basically.
Right. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So it becomes at the highest level, I think it's a real estate game, a machine game, because machines depreciate, right?
Right.
And a way to find cheap staff that is qualified, right? Because of the high turnover, as you mentioned.
Right. Exactly.
That's how we do it. Even here, like, we have the small venture, the building, and it's all young people fresh out of school. After they've done 5 years, they go make their own small office. Normally here.
You more or less, you find your own niche, how you want to practice, the location, types of patients, types of insurance that you want to accept. So you establish the practice the way that you want to. So you have that opportunity.
And
Yeah.
what's the most profitable route for a young person? Is it what specialty? Like if we were to only to focus on return on investment.
In terms of income, the most
Mm-hmm.
profitable dental specialty,
Mm-hmm.
I would say oral surgery.
Surgery.
That's the 6 years after 4 years of general dental school.
So his best investment is in education.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, also, when you're an oral surgeon, you're like an MD, you're like a physician. You need a connection with a hospital. You have to do your surgical cases in a hospital setting. They're usually not done in an office. So you need that hospital affiliation. When you're a general dentist, or even a periodontist or an orthodontist, you don't necessarily need a hospital association. You can do it, you can practice in a private practice. But I would say oral surgery, yeah.
Oral surgery. Okay. So that's for
And
young
now a lot
people.
of the oral surgeons are getting involved with a lot of cosmetic procedures, um, facial reconstructions, Botox, things like that.
And even if
So,
someone were never to start their own practice, do you think, let's say, just a dentist or either specialized or not, if they do the whole career and then get retirement, do you think they'll be able to afford housing, cost of living, no problem?
well, I
Or it
think
depends
so.
on the
I
cost of
think it takes
tuition.
time. It takes
Mhm.
time. I think if you're going to practice as a solo practitioner, the best thing to do is really to own your own real estate.
Okay,
I think
so
that's,
always aim to be your own boss.
I think so.
That's a good
I
one.
think so. And do that, right? You're going to be paying hundreds and thousands of dollars in rent for 25 or 30 years. And at the end of that time,
What do
you
you
know, you have
really
a
own?
pension. Yeah,
It does.
exactly.
Wow,
There's
that's
really,
deep.
there's not much equity because there's no, and I don't want to sound like a downer, but that's the reality of it because there's no equity in the equipment. And the patient population, well, they stay with you or they can go to another dentist that accepts their insurance. So really the only equity is in the real estate at the end of a long career.
Right, right. I completely agree. I think even like in the worst case scenario, like rentals now are saturated, but you can have
Hmm.
some rental income, worst case scenario, and live off that plus the what do you call it? Like the
The
pension.
dental,
Yeah, yeah. After once you're retired, I guess I'm
right,
guessing.
right.
So very, very interesting. And then I have a question. So let's say I bought the
Sure.
place. I worked my whole life. I bought the place and I have the machine. And I want to retire, but I want to rent out the place with the machine. That's fetches a
Hmm.
higher price than without machinery, right?
You can do that. Sure. You can rent out the operatories per diem or on an annual basis. You can do that if you wanted to semi-retire. You can rent out the spaces to, upcoming dentists. Sure. That can be done. That's an alternative.
So it becomes passive over an extremely long period of time if you were smart enough to find cheap property that doesn't devalue.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's it. And then
So,
if you were to start again, would you also choose another private home or an office for as a property?
to invest in,
Mm-hmm.
either way, it depends upon the community and the local restrictions as well. The zoning is important. I mean, in our situation, we purchased, it's really just like I said, a one family house, and it was zoned commercially and residentially. So before we purchased it, it was inhabited by a family of four. We had to convert it into a dental office, but the zoning was both commercially and residentially. So we didn't have that issue. If you had to convert it from a residence to a business, you'd have to apply for variances, and that would be very difficult to do. I don't know if that would be feasible either economically or time wise. So zoning is important as well.
Right. So make
Yeah.
sure that it's not easy to convert a home to a dental office, basically.
No, no, it's not. It's not. Yeah, there are all kinds of restrictions, electrical, plumbing, and putting in
I
dental
didn't know
equipment.
that. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to set it up like a mini operatory, like a mini OR, operating
and
room.
and that's based
So,
off.
there are a lot of requirements. You can't just put the equipment in. There are a lot of restrictions that there are, and there's a lot to do.
That's based off OSHA's rules, or
OSHA,
and that's on
exactly.
state, right? That's federal.
Well, OSHA state, there are state and federal regulations.
Do
with
you
that.
want to tell people what OSHA is, just so they don't, because it's a technical.
Well, there are certain requirements, locally, state-wise, and federally that you have to fulfill in order to open a dental office.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of restrictions. Of course, licensure is one, and the equipment itself. The connecting of the equipment, plumbing has to be changed, electrical has to be updated. There's a lot involved with it. Yeah. So there's a lot involved. But there's no easy way. There's no easy way. I think this is an alternative. If someone is thinking about retirement, I think this is it's an alternative to retirement. I would have done it if I had known this. I would have done it earlier in my career. It's a difficult thing for a dentist to be able to invest in property when they're 5 years out of school, because they have other expenses, especially if they have a home mortgage, if they have a family, tuitions and things like that. It's a difficult thing to do. That's probably another
it's
reason
not
why I
even
made it.
legal for a dentist to live in his office?
Well, no, you can.
Okay.
If you have a home
It's-
office, some townships require that if you're practicing in the office, you have a home office, you have to also live in the
wow.
house. Yeah, you have to live upstairs or whatever. Yeah.
Financially, for young people, I think that sounds like a good idea to live in the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah, sure.
And then
Yeah,
once
sure.
that's paid off, you can buy a home or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Or and when you have your own home, you can rent out that aspect of the building that you were residing in previously, which is what we did. We rented out a second floor that brought passive income.
That's a good
And
idea.
we were located right near the Port Washington train station in Nassau County on Long Island in New York. And we had the opportunity of renting out parking spaces to commuters outside. So that was more passive income.
So the dentist's office
Electrician.
produce passive income from the parking and from the second floor.
And from renting the second
That's
floor. Yeah.
so smart. That's such a
Yeah,
good
yeah,
idea.
well. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think those were all my questions really for the dentistry part of it and the business part of it as well. I just think that like you said, beautiful profession, do it if you love it, because it's so difficult and requires commitment.
right. You need to have that burning desire, that passion,
I agree.
because there are going to be a lot of tough days like any business, but it's hard work, time consuming. It's physically it's very demanding.
Yeah.
And that's just how the profession is. It's all hands on.
And
So it's physically demanding.
from what I can tell also, there's you're risking not just money but like everything. It's an all-in type of thing if you're
Yes.
in it.
Yeah. Full dedication.
Full dedication until you're
Yeah.
done, and then even when you're done, if you're gonna keep the property, you're still in.
You're
Like,
still in.
You're not out.
Yeah, exactly. At a different level, but you're still in.
Right.
Because
Like
you still have the worry,
the
the
operating.
patients,
Yeah.
how procedures go, patients.
Hmm.
It's running a business, having employees. So you're still hands on. Maybe you're practicing less, but it's still a lot of responsibility. But it's I guess it's a way to cut back your hours a little bit and manage more than anything else, which I think a lot of dentists do that in later years.
So advice to young
Um,
people: become your own boss eventually in this.
Yeah, I think so. There are different ways to practice any profession, law, medicine, dentistry. Like I said, you create your own niche. You practice the way you want to practice, and for whatever suits you.
All right. Thank you. I think
So.
for this segment, that's all the questions